Many years ago, as a much younger man, I sat in the office of a rabbi of a local synagogue. It was one of the most depressing and humiliating experiences that I had ever experienced before. The rabbi was extremely arrogant and condescending, and a simple conversation turned into an experience that I will never forget. Now, unfortunately, this rabbi, as it turned out, was known for this type of behavior. And many years later, once I had left that synagogue, I learned that the rabbi had been ousted from his position for certain improprieties of a different nature. Let's just put it that way. But that experience made me understand that if I ever became a rabbi, because I was only in the process of starting my academic studies, that I would do everything possible to avoid that type of arrogance and condescension, because I realized immediately that this was a Chilul Hashem, a desecration of God's name. There's very little that a leader can do that's worse than treat someone in a very poor fashion. It desecrates the name of God, and it damages the ability of that individual, man or woman, to connect to Hashem. Now, in last week's Parashat Korach, we saw that Korach, Datan, and Abiram, and 250 individuals who they've convinced to be part of this essential insurrection, confront Moshe Rabbeinu over an accusation of nepotism favoring Aaron to be the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, and for Moshe Rabbeinu, in essence, for having taken too much upon himself. Now, what's interesting, if we look at the person of Korach, because Korach was not simply a part of the family of Kehat, Levi'im, who were charged with transporting the implements, the ark and so forth in the Mishkan. It was already an elevated position. He was also a firstborn. So we think about the fact that before the sin of the golden calf, the firstborn, the intention was that they would serve in this kind of Levitical priesthood, if you will, capacity. And so in many ways, Korach doesn't really achieve an elevated position. He's already at an elevated position. He just simply transfers over under the category of the Levi'im. But the process by which the Levi'im were to be consecrated for the service of the Mishkan was in many ways quite challenging. They were to undergo a complete removal, shearing or cutting the hair from all parts of their body. And anyone who's entered into middle age knows, especially among males, that losing hair, thinning hair, certainly among individuals who have sicknesses and things of that nature that cause that, or God forbid, lo aleinu, chemotherapy, things of this nature, that it's something that is very, very traumatic. People don't want to, lose that because it's a sign of strength, a sign of human beauty, I think, in most people's eyes. And I think in many ways it causes an individual to be humbled in some kind of way. Maybe perhaps because it confronts us with the reality that we are limited in our lifespans because we're made of flesh and blood. Whatever it is, there's something about it that sort of gives us an indication that our time here is fixed and that we are flesh and blood. And it's something of a bearing out. If you lose your hair, I can imagine it's something that is very difficult to deal with. But Korach failed to understand that that process was necessary for the Levi'im to undergo because it was Hashem's command, but the service that they were being elevated to was something that was completely devoted to Hashem. Instead, he was worried about his own stature in his own eyes. And of course, the Midrash elaborates on the confrontation between Moshe Rabbeinu and himself, the question that he asked regarding Techelet and a Talit, and a mezuzah, and a house full of books, a Sephorim, all these things that he presents, whether we take them literally or just, as a point of teaching, he uses these to present himself as more knowledgeable than Moshe Rabbeinu. And yet, the response that Moshe Rabbeinu has is, I think, indicative of what leaders and of every individual should have. It says that he fell to the ground. And that is an amazing statement. There's a verse in Sefer Iyov in the book of Job. I have it here. I wanted to read this to you because I think it's extremely powerful. It says, when they cast thee down, thou shalt say, there is lifting up. For the humble person he saveth. That's from Job And it's chapter 2, verse 29. I'll make sure that I have it here, the reference. Sorry, live 22, verse 29. It's a very powerful image that we have there. Moshe Rabbeinu hears the challenge and he falls to the ground because his own sense of who he is ultimately rooted in the revelation that God has given to him, but also in a recognition that ultimately he's no one. Of course, he's Moshe Rabbeinu, but at the same time, he's made of the dust of the earth. And yet, when Moses rises, he then tells Korach and his band of followers what Hashem has commanded and what will happen the next day when Hashem makes it clear who has been chosen and who has not. And so the point here, I think, is very clear. Humility is ultimately what vanquishes arrogance. Humility is what we should all strive for. And all of us, whether we are learned or still learning or in the process of beginning a path towards study, should always remember that we are simply dust of the earth and Hashem is the one that chooses to elevate us if and only if we humble ourselves before Hashem.